The public hospital corridor was a river of hurried indifference. People rushed past, nurses wheeled gurneys, and doctors whispered in hushed groups. The smell of disinfectant mixed with reheated coffee from the vending machine created a familiar atmosphere of contained urgency. It was Monday morning, and the pediatric oncology waiting room was particularly busy. In the far corner, almost pressed against the faded, hopeful green wall, a woman held the hand of a girl about 8 years old. The child wore a colorful headscarf printed with bouncing unicorns that contrasted with the paleness of her skin. Her large, curious eyes observed everything around her with the intensity of someone who has learned to appreciate every moment, every detail. The woman, who appeared to be in her mid-40s, wore a simple, clean blouse with almost imperceptible small patches on the sleeves. Her hands, calloused from work, trembled slightly as she flipped through a children's magazine for her daughter. This was Clara, a cleaning lady who worked 3 different jobs to pay for little Sophia's treatment. Her face bore the marks of sleepless nights and constant worry, but her eyes held an unwavering sweetness whenever she looked at the girl. "Mommy, when will the doctor call me?" Sophia whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Soon, my love. She's taking care of other children, too," Clara replied, gently adjusting her daughter's headscarf. They had arrived at 5 in the morning to secure a place in line. Clara had taken 3 different buses, leaving home at 3:30 a.m. Sophia had slept in her mother's lap during the entire trip, and now they had been waiting for over 4 hours for an appointment that had been scheduled for 7. The electronic number display blinked monotonously, calling numbers that seemed never to approach theirs. Clara discreetly glanced at the clock on the wall. She knew she needed to be at work by 2 p.m. at an office downtown. If the appointment was delayed too much, she would lose a day's pay, and that would mean less money for Sophia's medicine. Not far from them, a group of mothers chatted loudly, comparing private health insurance plans and complaining about the delay. One of them, wearing designer clothes and understated but expensive jewelry, sighed dramatically with each passing minute. "This is outrageous," she muttered to the others. "My insurance covers private consultations, but today the pediatrician only sees patients here. A terrible waste of time." Clara lowered her eyes, pretending to concentrate on the magazine. Sophia, however, continued to observe everything with her natural curiosity. The girl noticed that other families who arrived after them were being called first, and whispered an innocent question to her mother. "Mommy, why did that lady who just arrived go before us?" Clara gently squeezed her daughter's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes. She had noticed the same pattern. Families with a more prosperous appearance, some carrying private insurance papers, were discreetly prioritized in the line. It wasn't anything official, there was no announcement about it, but the subtle discrimination happened through looks, whispers, and small administrative gestures. A nurse passed them several times, always with a neutral, almost indifferent expression. When Clara got up to ask about the appointment time, she was treated with cold, distant politeness. "It's not your turn yet. Please sit and wait," was the curt reply she received. Sophia began to get tired. Her morning energy had drained, and she rested her head on her mother's shoulder, dozing intermittently. Clara stroked the girl's hair over the headscarf, an automatic gesture of protection and affection. Her lips silently murmured a prayer, asking for strength for another day, another battle. The hours crawled by with cruel slowness. Clara watched other children being called, some visibly less debilitated than Sophia, but whose families carried the assurance of knowing they would be seen quickly. The injustice was silent, almost invisible, but weighed on the air like uncomfortable humidity. It was then that Clara noticed a man sitting a few chairs ahead. He wore a white coat, but he didn't look like an ordinary doctor. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his hands, when he flipped through some papers, showed the precision of someone accustomed to making important decisions. Occasionally, he looked around the waiting room, observing the families with an attention that went beyond simple curiosity. The man was Dr. Edward Miller, the hospital's clinical director. He had decided to spend the morning walking the corridors, observing the functioning of the different departments. It was something he did periodically, but many staff members didn't know. He preferred this discreet approach, observing reality without his presence altering people's behavior. Dr. Miller had noticed Clara and Sophia early on. Something about the woman's dignified posture, the way she cared for her daughter with such dedication, caught his attention. He also observed the subtle dynamics of the waiting room, the small privileges granted, the way some families were treated differently from others. Clara, realizing that the man was observing them from time to time, felt a mixture of discomfort and hope. Perhaps he was just another curious doctor, or perhaps someone who could help them. But she didn't dare nurture too many expectations. She had already learned that high hopes could hurt as much as her daughter's illness. Sophia woke from her nap and whispered that she was thirsty. Clara looked around, searching for a water fountain, but didn't want to leave their places in line. She knew that if she left, she might lose even more positions. The girl insisted, and Clara found herself having to get up. "Let's get some water real quick, my love, but we'll be right back," she said, taking care to memorize exactly where they were sitting. When they returned 2 minutes later, their chairs were occupied by another family. Clara felt her heart sink, but said nothing. She found 2 empty seats further back, away from the reception, where they would be even harder to notice. Sophia, despite her young age, noticed the change in her mother's face. The girl had a special sensitivity developed through months of treatment and constant exposure to difficult situations. "It's okay, Mommy. This is fine too," she said, trying to comfort her mother with her precocious wisdom. Clara smiled, fighting back the tears that threatened to appear. How could an 8-year-old be so strong, so understanding? She held her daughter's hand and whispered, "You are my strength, Sophia, my light." Dr. Miller had observed the entire scene. He saw Clara and Sophia leave, lose their seats, and settle further back without complaint. He also saw the resignation on the woman's face, the way she accepted this small injustice without protest. And he saw, most importantly, how the girl tried to console her. It was at that moment that something changed within him. It wasn't just professional indignation at the system's workings, but something deeper, more human. He discreetly got up and walked to the reception desk. The head nurse, upon seeing him approach, completely changed her posture. She straightened in her chair, quickly organized the papers in front of her, and smiled professionally. "Good morning, Dr. Miller. How may I help you?" "Good morning, Nurse Davis. I'm observing the patient flow this morning. I'd like to better understand how appointments are organized." The woman became visibly nervous. She began to explain the appointment system, the urgency protocols, the differences between insurance coverage and public service. Dr. Miller listened patiently, asking specific questions about priority criteria. "And that family over there?" he asked, discreetly pointing towards Clara and Sophia. "How long have they been waiting?" The nurse looked in the indicated direction and made an expression of someone trying to remember. "Oh, yes, they arrived very early, but the case isn't urgent, so they follow the normal queue." "Normal?" repeated Dr. Miller, in a tone that wasn't exactly a question, but that made the woman shift uncomfortably in her chair. "Yes, sir. Service in order of arrival, respecting medical priorities, of course." Dr. Miller nodded slowly, but his eyes continued to observe the room. He had worked in public hospitals his entire life. He knew well the unofficial dynamics that occurred. He knew that medical priorities could be a broad and sometimes subjective term. At this moment, it's impossible not to think about how stories like this touch us and make us reflect on our own ability to make a difference in the world. If you're following this narrative and it's resonating with you, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are those that remind us of the strength that exists in simple gestures, in everyday compassion, in the capacity we all have to transform someone's day. And that's exactly what's about to happen here. Dr. Miller returned to his chair, but now with a different purpose. He took out his cell phone and made a few discreet calls. He spoke with the pediatrician in charge of the department, checked the day's schedule, and asked some questions about the most urgent cases. His voice was calm, professional, but there was a growing determination in his actions. Clara, meanwhile, continued to entertain Sophia with the magazine. The girl had found a story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom and asked her mother to read it in a low voice. Clara read with all the dramatic flair she could muster, making different voices for each character, trying to make her daughter forget the tiredness and the delay. Other people in the room began to pay attention to the reading. There was something hypnotic about Clara's soft voice, the way she completely dedicated herself to entertaining her daughter. An elderly woman smiled as she listened. A mother with her baby in her arms paid attention to the story. Even the man complaining on the phone about the delay lowered his voice so as not to interrupt. Sophia giggled quietly at the funny voices her mother made, temporarily forgetting where she was and why she was there. Her eyes shone with joy, and for a few minutes the hospital waiting room transformed into a magical place where brave princesses existed. Dr. Miller watched all this with growing admiration. There was something profoundly touching in the scene, a mother transforming a difficult moment into a moment of joy for her daughter, creating beauty and hope in an environment that tended to be cold and antiseptic. It was then that he made a decision. He got up again and walked to the reception desk, but this time he didn't speak softly. His voice, although controlled, was projected so that the entire room could hear. "Nurse Davis, I need to check a situation. The family of that girl with the unicorn headband," he said, clearly pointing to Clara and Sophia. "How long exactly have they been waiting?" The silence that followed was almost palpable. The entire waiting room stopped whispering, stopped fiddling with their cell phones, stopped flipping through magazines. Clara felt the blood rush to her face, a mixture of embarrassment and hope. The nurse looked at the computer, nervous. "Well, sir, they arrived at 5 in the morning. They've been here for," she did the calculations, 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours? Repeated Dr. Miller, and there was something in his voice that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably in their chair. "And what is the medical reason for this wait?" "Sir, it's that the case wasn't classified as urgent, and we have to attend to some private insurance patients who have priority in the system." "Priority?" Dr. Miller interrupted, his voice still calm, but now with an authority no one dared question. "What kind of priority?" The nurse stammered, trying to explain protocols she herself knew weren't written anywhere. Dr. Miller let her speak for a few seconds, then raised his hand in a gentle but firm gesture. "Thank you, nurse. I think I understand the situation perfectly." He turned to the waiting room, and his gaze swept across each face. There were worried parents, tired children, anxious grandparents. All awaited words that could change the course of their day. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice carried decades of experience, of nights on call saving lives, of difficult decisions made in critical moments. "My name is Dr. Edward Miller. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of this hospital, and I need to talk to you about something very important." Clara felt her heart race. Sophia clung to her mother's arm, sensing that something significant was happening. "I've worked at this hospital for 25 years," Dr. Miller continued. "I've seen this place grow, improve, save thousands of lives. But today, looking at this room, I remember why I became a doctor. It wasn't for the diplomas on my office wall. It wasn't for professional recognition. It was for you. For every child who needs care, for every family fighting illness, for every mother who transforms a waiting room into a place of love and hope." He paused and looked directly at Clara. "A few minutes ago, I watched a mother read stories to her daughter. I saw how she transformed suffering into joy, how she created magic in a place where magic seems impossible. I saw an 8-year-old girl comfort her own mother when they lost their places in line. I saw dignity, courage, and unconditional love." Tears began to stream down Clara's face. Sophia held her mother's hand tighter, not fully understanding the words, but sensing the importance of the moment. "And I realized that, somewhere along the way, this hospital forgot something fundamental," Dr. Miller continued. "It forgot that we don't treat cases, we treat people. We don't treat diseases, we treat human beings who deserve respect, dignity, and equal care regardless of their social or economic status." He approached Clara and Sophia, walking slowly through the room. Several people were visibly moved. The elderly woman who had smiled during the reading discreetly wiped her eyes. The man complaining on his phone had put away his cell and was paying full attention. "Sophia," said Dr. Miller, kneeling down to be at the girl's level. "That's your name, isn't it?" The girl nodded shyly, still clinging to her mother's arm. "Sophia, did you know your name means wisdom? And wisdom is exactly what you showed today. Wisdom to comfort your mother, to transform the weight into a moment of joy, to teach all of us here what truly matters." He turned to Clara. "And ma'am, what is your name?" "Clara," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "Clara. Clarity. What a perfect name for a woman who brought clarity to me today. Clarity about what it means to be a doctor, about what it means to run a hospital, about what it means to serve our community." Dr. Miller stood up and looked again at the entire room. "From today on, some things will change in this hospital. We will review our treatment protocols. We will ensure that every family is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. We will remember that every child here is as important as our own children." He paused and turned to the head nurse. Dr. Miller kept his word. He personally followed Sophia's treatment, ensuring she had access to the best care available. But more than that, he learned from Clara and Sophia the true meaning of courage and hope. Months later, when Sophia was in complete remission, she and Clara organized a small party in the hospital waiting room. They brought cake, balloons, and, of course, many stories to read. Dr. Miller attended the party, as did other staff members who had been touched by the family's journey. During the celebration, Sophia approached Dr. Miller with a drawing she had made. It was an image of a hospital, but not cold and white as they usually are. It was colorful, full of flowers and smiles, with people holding hands. "This is how I see our hospital now," she said, handing him the drawing. "A place where people take care of each other." Dr. Miller hung the drawing on the wall of his office, next to his diplomas and certificates. But he knew that that child's art was worth more than any professional recognition he had ever received. The transformation that began that Monday morning continued to spread. The hospital became a reference not only in medical treatment, but in the humanization of care. Professionals from other hospitals came to learn about the project, wanting to understand how such a profound change had happened. Dr. Miller always told the same story, of a mother who transformed a waiting room into a place of love, of a girl who taught about wisdom and courage, of a moment when humanity overcame bureaucracy. Years later, when Sophia was grown and healthy, she still visited the hospital occasionally, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, reading stories to other children undergoing treatment. Clara, in turn, had gotten a job at the hospital itself, working in the humanization department that Dr. Miller had created. The pediatric oncology waiting room gained a small library, with books donated by families who had passed through there. On the wall, a discreet plaque read, "Sophia's Library," where every story matters. Few knew the origin of the name, but everyone who frequented the space felt the magic it carried. Dr. Miller, nearing retirement, used to say in his lectures that he learned more about medicine in one morning observing Clara and Sophia than in years of college. That true healing came not only from medicines and procedures, but from human care, preserved dignity, and unconditional love. And every time he told this story, he ended the same way, reminding everyone that each of us has the power to transform someone's day, to restore hope where it seemed lost, to create moments of beauty even in the most unlikely places. The story of Clara and Sophia became a silent legend in the hospital, passed from employee to employee, from family to family. It wasn't a story about medical miracles or impossible cures. It was a story about the transformative power of compassion, about how small gestures can change the world. And in every child who laughed during a story read in the waiting room, in every family that felt welcomed and respected, in every employee who remembered to see the person before seeing the patient, the presence of Clara and Sophia continued to live on, inspiring new generations to believe that humanity can always overcome indifference. The hospital continued operating, saving lives, curing diseases. But now it did so differently, always remembering that the most powerful medicine is one that treats not only the body, but also the soul, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who transform suffering into hope, who create light where there was only darkness, who remind us all that we all deserve to be treated with dignity and love. Just like the brave princess in the story Sophia read that memorable morning, Clara and her daughter discovered their true strength wasn't in the ability to fight the disease, but in the ability to inspire others to be better, more humane, more compassionate. And this is a lesson that echoes far beyond the hospital walls, reminding us all that the power to transform the world is in our hands, in our daily actions, in our ability to see and value the humanity in every person we meet.